guys, my name is Amanda Joy Anderson and welcome to my channel. Today is the second episode of Meltdown 2 Enlightenment, and we will be talking about isolation from prison to peace. And I really wanted to do this subject sooner, but I just couldn't get it out of me to be able to present it to you guys. With everything, with the pandemic and people being stuck inside, and some parts of the world are open and other parts are not, a lot of this emotional turmoil can come up in these spaces, and I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about that because I have quite a bit of experience in isolation, and I am so excited to share this with you guys. So isolation can create a prison-like feel or a peaceful feel. It just really depends on where you are on the spectrum. It's like living on different sides of a coin, but you can get to each side, you can travel to each side in between it. And this is what I have learned throughout my life of having to experience moments of isolation. If you look into evolutionary astrology in the Pluto book by Jeffrey Wolf Green, on the very first page, it talks about how we have two desires in this lifetime. Now, if you don't know anything about astrology or you don't care for astrology, that is okay. But it is always good to share perspective. And so in this book, it talks about that the soul comes here to have two different desires. And these desires are, one, to experience itself, and the other is to experience source or experience the whole. So within that, we can see this polarity between each other. And I really wanted to start this video off here because this is where we can see the dynamic of differences of experience within this polarity. So in my early childhood, I spent a lot of time in my room, and it was really my own personal sanctuary. And I did a lot of creating, and I put on like grand performances karaokeing Celine Dion. And it was very exciting for me to be in there and play in there, and it was what I enjoyed. There was school, and then there was my home time when I was in my room playing with all kinds of different things, creating all kinds of different scenarios in my head and performing them or whatever it was. But that was my time to myself. And actually thinking back on it, when people came was like, "Oh, Amanda, it's time for dinner," I would be like, like I didn't want to go out because it was like disturbing my own creative process. Now, as I got older, probably throughout middle school, what I really noticed is that when I turned to isolate myself, it was due to trauma. And through that trauma, because what I found within myself was that I didn't trust people anymore, and that it wasn't just not trusting people, but it was also a source to protect myself. And with the pandemic and everything, as of recently, I think a lot of people have experienced coming from that same emotional place. So when I was coming from that place of trying to protect myself, um, and because I didn't trust people, what I started to notice that in my own personal isolation through those years, um, that isolation became almost a form of escapism. And it was very hard to deal with because I didn't want to deal with people and experience people. And at the same exact time, I was also having a really hard time with my personal thoughts and emotions, and I was suicidal in that time. So that made it really hard for me to cope in isolation because I was in this space of I didn't want to experience people. I didn't want to know people on this deeper level. And at the same time of having to deal with all of these thoughts and emotions, that was really the only thing circulating in my head at that time, because besides like going to school and going out so often with friends and stuff like that, I spent a huge deal of time isolating myself and kind of pulling myself away from people. My isolation itself had transformed from a place of play to a place of protection. And in that process, it almost warped everything that I enjoyed about being alone and almost made it quite traumatizing and this own prison that I had put myself in. And within that prison, pretty much any symptoms that doctors state that people can have because of personal isolation, I experienced. I experienced hallucinations. I experienced paranoia. I experienced depression, suicidal thoughts. And all of this was very cyclical for me. And it continued and it became very hard. And so I tried to cope with different coping mechanisms. And one of my favorite ways of working myself out of that space was I started to take up painting again and taking up writing. Now, if we look at that, at what prisoners in the system actually experience when they go into isolation, we can see that even if they've been in isolation for a short period of time, they can experience a higher percentage in suicides, homicides, and opioid addiction. And so to say that everyone that has gone through the pandemic, that we do have a very real crisis coming up with people who have experienced isolation in this time period. So, how did I walk myself out of my own prison like state? And really, it was a process of things. It was a process of writing out my thoughts and my emotions. It was a process of painting and being able to express myself through art. It was a process of meditation and examining my emotions and my thought patterns. And it really started by me unpacking what was going on internally and starting to begin to organize what was going on. What's helpful is to be able to write it out. And this is really what I had started to do. Somewhere along my journey, I found this tarot card reader called Blissful Heart, and I saw her organize what was going on this, in the belief state, in the mental state, in the emotional state, in the physical state with tarot cards. And I thought, oh wow, isn't that's cool? And I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to take that on. I have a Virgo self node, so like organization is like, I love it. So I took that state on and started to do that with everything that was going on internally. Because before, I would go into, like in the very beginning of meditation, what I found was that it was almost like depression. And I'm pretty sure it was. Because I was just going in, diving into the abyss of my emotions, and it was just like guilt, shame, fear. It was everywhere. Like, so, through that process of being able to organize myself, what was going on internally, and being able to look at my physical surroundings and trying to figure out, oh, okay, well, why doesn't this line up with this? If I believe this, why am I still doing this? It helped me really create a blueprint for myself to work through and identify inner conflict. And I found that very helpful. But I really had to move from a place that was all about protection and start to move into a place of play. And that's where I really started to notice a difference in my own internal space and with my isolation. Now, if we look at the group of people with Pluto in the first house, they are going to be experts at this because they go through periods of being in relationships and then also spending a lot of time in isolation to kind of unwind and unprogram themselves from other people's expectations and beliefs. And I've been diving and reading into this lately because in whole house, mine's in the first house, my Pluto's in the first house. So in that time period of isolation, it's really like a deprogramming. And so I would spend time deprogramming myself from social media, from people, from relationships, and really starting to create my own personal identity outside of friend groups, outside of family, outside of any type of relationships, to find out who I was on an individual level. And this process, this is probably one of my favorite things to do in isolation. It has become an obsession, but it is to pull all the pieces that are not me off. And because it's like you get exposed to so many things especially through like social media, and the news and TV and all of that. And then the next thing you know, you end up saying other things that people are saying. You start talking and believing what other people or saying and believing, and it becomes almost like this AI robotic society, and to like pull all of those layers off of you. It's like my own personal detox from society. And so I really enjoy this process in myself. However, it is important to still integrate and have relationships with people. You know, I think when you've been in isolation for a long time and you've meditated through it for many, many years, and you still have these moments of wanting to connect with people, wanting to have friends that are more like you in a sense, wanting to have relationships that are more equal versus different power dynamics, and really creating more healthy relationships in your life. And that is a part of isolation, is being able to see the relationships that are not that, and being able to move forward in understanding why you have certain relationships and how you are able to move forward to create healthier relationships. And that's really what, in isolation, it becomes your playground of really getting to know yourself and cultivating a relationship with yourself. And it becomes this very beautiful place to create a foundation to move from. Now, diving deeper into isolation can be also become toxic. Uh, I have a lot of run-ins with this, because there will be many times where I will get a text message from my friend and they're like, Amanda, where have you been? And it's not like I'm doing anything crazy. Well, sometimes maybe, but like for the most part, it's just me exploring myself. And back to when I was a child, I just get so engrossed into everyday life and doing things like this, or reading or learning, that I forget that months have passed by and I haven't texted someone to check up on like how they're doing or what they're doing. And so it can be toxic in the way that you become too comfortable in isolation. And I think maybe a lot of people are experiencing that after the pandemic of being locked inside, and now the schedule is just Netflix and not talking to anyone, where, you know, in some aspect that's beautiful if you want to do a little self-care that way, but then also it's about finding a balance in what's healthy, because relationships are healthy. Having relationships with people, whether if it's romantic or platonic, teaches us a lot about ourselves and a lot about who we are in the world. And so having these relationships in our life can be very helpful, because sometimes we can get way too comfortable in our isolation. I know I can, for sure. And many times I do. I go in my little scorpionic cave, supposed to be this social person. I really do enjoy hiding out and being in my cave and being in comfort. Because life can be very extreme sometimes, and but I have to always remember to push myself out there and to let myself be seen. Because there is something healing in that for myself. Sometimes comfort can be toxic, and we have to well, not necessarily you, but me for sure, I have to experience different avenues in life and push myself out there instead of always hiding in my little cave, as he sees it. So I think this is absolutely necessary if you are experiencing isolation as a prison. Don't be afraid to play with your isolation and make it feel very childlike again. I think that's one very important aspect. Another one would be to try to organize yourself internally when you do have that time to yourself, because it's very helpful and it's very beautiful to be able to transform if you have internal sufferings that way, to be able to identify where they are coming from. Also, you know, because isolation can be toxic, don't be afraid to go out and go somewhere to try to meet new people. Even if you meet them online and then you meet them out in person, or you go and say hi to a friend or have coffee with a friend. Try not to let all of those moments pass you by, because a lot of times we can get so comfortable and stuck in isolation that we forget to interact with the rest of the world. I hope that I explained different tools and different activities for you guys to use if you are still finding yourself in isolation. And I hope I provided a different perspective that you can go ahead and take on for yourself and transform it into whatever works for you. All right. So I hope you guys have a beautiful day, and I will see you on the next episode.